What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast where we interview creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. I'm Phillip Russell, and I'm here with my co-host,
Ben Thorp.
Ben, have you ever considered getting therapy?
I have. Quite often. Yeah.
What about AI therapy?
You know, I'm immediately out. I'm good on that.
Well, we talked to Matthew Seiji Burns, who is the creator of a visual novel called Eliza, which is all about AI counseling programs that were developed to help people with mental health in Seattle, Washington. You follow a character named Evelyn, who used to work at a tech startup developing this AI software called Eliza. And she has a secret, and she's trying to better understand something about the program when the game starts. Really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really liked about it, and we get into it pretty early in the conversation, so I won't tread on it too much, but the game is kind of a sci-fi futuristic spin on an Eliza chatbot that was created in the 1960s. And one of the things that I think has really stuck with me is I got kind of obsessed with the perspective of its creator, Joseph Weizenbaum, who initially created this thing kind of as almost as like a way to lampoon, you know, the ability of robots to communicate with us, and then increasingly became kind of horrified by how much people began connecting with the chatbot program. And in a lot of ways, I think has become kind of is it too strong to say anti-tech? And I think I'm, in a lot of ways, like I've really come around to the school of Weizenbaum that this game has introduced me to.
Yeah, it was interesting, because as I was playing the game, I wasn't aware of this old chatbot named Eliza. So I came into the game thinking, wow, this is such an interesting concept. I don't know how Matthew would have came up with this. And then halfway through the game or something like that, I realized like, oh shit, this is based off of reality. And then, as you're talking about kind of reading through these old interviews and seeing just how true they ring today, was really fascinating. And I think that Matthew does a really good job, though, of showing a pretty even perspective on technology and not necessarily beating us over the head with a narrative that's structured around technology bad, we need less of it.
Right. Which is like, I hate to, I think, I always feel silly saying this as someone who's like, oh, I work in journalism, and so I should be like really on board with this even-handed messaging. Like that's a good, perspective to have. But I think pretty early on, I started kind of talking to you about feeling like it wasn't coming down strong enough. And like, again, I am someone who I think maybe has I veer a little bit too far towards the Luddite perspective, where I'm like, maybe we should just destroy all of the robots. Anytime like Boston Dynamics puts out a video of those robots doing anything, I'm like, we should probably annihilate them like right now. And so I was having this reaction where I think like, you're right. He has this even-handed perspective. You get a bunch of different kind of tech sector perspectives on technology. Some people who are skeptical, some people who are like, they believe that it's going to create this utopian future. And then Eliza, who like, I think throughout the game, you're not really quite sure what her perspective is. And I found myself really grating with that. But I thought he had ultimately like a really good answer, for why because ultimately he kind of says like, the game does have a perspective. You just have to kind of wait for it. Ultimately, like the game is going to have a vision for like the right, version of viewing this stuff. But he didn't want to kind of front load that in a way that is like too in your face. And like, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And I think given the fact that both of us are writers who primarily work within the written and sonic form, there is something to be said about what is the value of the interactive aspect in a visual novel, or like why visual novel is something that we talk a lot about in the interview. And I gotta say, Matthew makes a good case for the value of the interactivity, no matter how big or small it is in it. So I was really I felt like my world opened up a bit more in terms of how I think about interactivity and what kinds of stories can only be told within this kind of medium. So I'm really excited for everybody to listen to this one. I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right, roll the clip. Matthew Seiji Burns is a writer, director, composer, and game designer. With the help of Zachtronics Game Studio, he created Eliza, a visual novel about an AI counseling program that the people who develop it and the people who use it. Prior to Eliza, Burns worked on a variety of games. He's the creator of the interactive fiction project Apology Simulator, The Writer Will Do Something, and the Arboretum. He's also worked with Zachtronics to write and compose for titles such as EXAPunks, Opus Magnum, and more. Burns has also worked as a producer for Treyarch, Bungie, and 343 Industries on titles such as Halo 3 and Halo ODST. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we brought you on because we recently played through your visual novel Eliza, and I think Ben and I have just been thinking all about these ideas around mental health and wellness, how that kind of intersects with the tech industry, especially right now, kind of after a year of COVID and lockdown, and then kind of expanding into thinking about interactive fiction. So we're really excited to kind of talk about all those things.
Thanks. So am I.
So yeah, how about we just jump right in and talk about Eliza? And I think to start us off, could you walk us through a bit about kind of what inspired the project or what the genesis was to kind of get you thinking about the themes of that game?
Yeah. So the idea for Eliza came to me in a pretty specific instant. There was a time when I was working at the University of Washington, helping to make games for a research lab. And as part of that, I got really involved in games for education and games for scientific discovery and that kind of serious games side of things. And as a part of that, I went to a few different conferences where people were showcasing game technology used for things like discovery of scientific things or mental health or other applications like that. And so I saw this very particular demo of a AI therapist, basically. Not really AI. It was more of just like an avatar therapist, and it just really struck me, this person talking to a therapist about their most innermost feelings, but at the same time it was a computer and it was doing all this computer vision on their face and it was trying to do all this voice recognition on what they were saying. And so the juxtaposition of that kind of very raw humanity versus like the kind of the analytical approach of the computer made me think, wow, I really want to explore this more and potentially write a story about it. And that was in 2014, I want to say 2015. And I kind of had this as this story that I was working on, mulling it over and turning it over. And then working with Zach at Zachtronics a few years later, I happened to tell him about the idea and he got interested in it. And he said, why don't we do this as a game? We have a little studio. We have these resources, so we could make it here. And so that's kind of how Eliza came to be.
So I think your game really got both of us, I think, to look at the history of the Eliza chatbot, something that I kind of personally didn't know about. And I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about how that chatbot program kind of is part of, or that history of that chatbot program is a part of this visual novel.
So Eliza, the visual novel, is named after that original chatbot, Eliza, which was invented in the 1960s by a professor of computer science named Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT. And it's pretty remarkable, considering that it is from the 1960s, that it does a pretty good job of actually chatting with you, and kind of making it seem like you're actually talking to someone. It's all a trick. It's all an illusion, and that was actually the whole point of it. If you haven't used Eliza before, the original Eliza, what it does is it just kind of takes your input and sort of turns it around back at you. So it never really understands what you're saying, but it kind of like picks up that you're making a statement, and then it sort of rephrases what you said in the form of a question. So if you say, I don't feel well today, it would say, why do you say you don't feel well today? Or something like that. And it just keeps doing that forever. And after a while, it kind of breaks down, right? But especially for the time, I think no one had any sense of what it's like to talk to a computer. So it actually fooled a lot of people. And it also made people think that like computers that you could talk to were just around the corner. You know, this was the 60s, so they were starting to say like, well, by the 70s, we'll all be just talking to our computers. That didn't happen, obviously, until much later. And even today, computers still don't understand this and can be very frustrating. But that was kind of the effect of Eliza at the time. And because it turned things around, Weizenbaum said it was like a psychotherapist, because that's kind of like a model of therapy, right? Is just to continue to get you to keep talking. It just turns things around at you. And so Eliza is not only viewed as like the first chatbot, but it's also one of the very first inklings that we could use technology to address mental health. Weizenbaum himself said it was just a parody. It was just a toy, not to be taken seriously. But many other people did take it seriously, including real psychologists were like, oh, we can use this, right? And they were like, we're gonna run with this. And there was some academic work toward developing serious bots for mental health in the 70s. Even Carl Sagan, in his kind of more predictive mode, was talking about how we would all like sit in these little terminals and talk to our computer therapists in the future, things like that. So there's so much interesting going on with the historical Eliza. It's like human computer interaction. It's like what the future, what will the future of that be? It's talking to computers that fool us into thinking that they understand what we're doing. There's just so much going on there. It's such an interesting case study of like, where things were at the time and then where things went after that. So yeah, and looking at the history of computers and mental health, I couldn't not talk about Eliza. And then I had the idea that like if a big company, a big tech company, developed something like that today, like Apple's Siri or Microsoft's Cortana or Amazon's Alexa or whatever, they would give it a name. And then I thought, well, they would probably just give it the same name as the old program, just to like call back to it, right? So the new program in the fiction of my story is also called Eliza.
I think so. Okay, so you talked a lot about Weizenbaum, and one of the things, so I was going back and reading some of the old interviews with him, and he got, I think, really skeptical, even though he was the person who kind of created this program. And again, I think you did mention created it as a parody, but felt uncomfortable with the way people began to kind of forge relationships, I think, as he saw it, with that chatbot program. Here's the quote: "I had not realized that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people." I'm wondering, do you think that your game is about exploring the way that people develop relationships with computers?
Part of it absolutely is. I wanted to show different ways that people could engage with something like this. There's something interesting that goes on when you speak to something that is not necessarily understanding you. Weizenbaum himself was very, very skeptical of it and came out as kind of a sort of an iconoclast, especially for the MIT of his era. in the 60s and 70s, you were supposed to be super pro technology, and AI will be a solved problem, and get all those great government contracts to, Defense Department contracts to develop AI and things like that. So he did no favors to his career for being that way, but he was very skeptical about it, and he ended up writing a book later called Computer Power and Human Reason, where he sort of argues that even if a future computer could do psychotherapy, it would still be morally wrong. That psychotherapy is a human um, uh, concern. It's about being human, and only other humans should be doing that for each other. But there's another school of thought, which is that like people talk to things that don't understand them all the time, right? Like I come home and talk to my cat, and I'm sure my cat doesn't necessarily completely understand what I'm saying, but like you do talk to things and people and stuff, not necessarily always expecting full understanding. And sometimes that is nice, and sometimes that is therapeutic. And so, the person who developed the program that I saw the demo of that inspired Eliza made that comparison. He's like, it's like talking to a pet. That can be therapeutic, even though the pet doesn't necessarily understand what you're talking about exactly.
Yeah, I think you do a really good job in Eliza, the visual novel, of exploring kind of the ways in which these different characters make sense of their roles in relation to the technology, and in some ways I think try to find the silver lining in it. So about halfway through the game there's a conversation with Ray and Evelyn, and they're kind of talking about the inadequacies of Eliza, but ultimately kind of come to the conclusion that maybe there is some benefit to just simply voicing your issues aloud to this thing, like kind of what you're talking about, that maybe it doesn't fully understand, but maybe kind of understands. And I'm wondering if, if that moment kind of speaks to this idea, or the allure of trying to find the good in these technologies, despite the fact that oftentimes, these startups or corporations tend to veer into maybe these problematic avenues.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to try to explore the ways that the technology could be used well as the ways that it could be abused and used in the wrong way. It would have been easy for me, I think, to come out swinging and just say this is all terrible and all wrong. But I don't actually think that. I think it's, technology itself is neutral, and it's more about how we use it and how we design it and how we deploy it and what we want it to do. Those are the kinds of things that are most important that we think about, and that we're not thinking enough about. And so my approach with Eliza, the story, was definitely to try to explore the issue from a few different angles. Ray, who you mentioned, she works for the big company. She's kind of a defender of the technology. She's a little bit starstruck by the high flying CEO.
Right. What am I doing? I wanted to make something that would help people. Instead, I made something useless.
Oh, you don't think she got some companionship out of Eliza? Sometimes that's really a help, especially for someone who might be feeling lonely.
And so on. And that's I wanted to include that perspective in a character like that, even if I don't necessarily agree with it myself, because there are, as you probably know, there's a lot of people like that here in Seattle, people who are perfectly fine people and could even be your friend, and then they go work for Google, and you're just like, you know, I guess you've made peace with that yourself in some way. I don't want to like moralistically be a scold and tell people what they should or shouldn't do, but it's interesting to kind of think about what goes through people's minds when they are thinking of things like that and find themselves in those situations. So yeah, that the kind of the multiple perspectives thing was important to me from the start, to showcase people kind of like thinking about it in different ways. And that's true for the therapy clients too, right? Some people I think do get a benefit out of it. The character Maya, I think, is someone who seems to get a little bit of benefit out of it, and then others really bounce off it, and it doesn't help them at all. It's completely unsuited to them.
Yeah. As someone who I think like I felt that you were doing this great job of staying neutral and kind of not trying to tell the player how to think or how to feel about the technology. I was frustrated at times, and I'm wondering if you can talk about like why was it important to offer this, to allow the player to come to their own conclusions about the technology for themselves.
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well, because I think you weren't the only one to react that way. I think that there's definitely a strain of like, he's not saying anything about it because he's just kind of like saying it could be this or it could be that. And I think that for one, I think it's when you come into a media where like it's sort of a foregone conclusion. I think it's easy to short circuit your intellectual engagement a little bit, and you go into it knowing that a lot of cyberpunk stuff today is kind of like that, right? Where it's like you start playing and like the big corporation is bad immediately and all, and it prevents you from having to think about it. You just kind of like know that that's true. And so part of why I suddenly start introducing these perspectives, like Ray's perspective, for example, is I do want you to actually do the work and think about it, and not just let people off the hook and say like the big tech company is obviously evil. I could have done that, right? Like it could have been established very easily right from the start. There could have been all these visual cues to all this like cyberpunk, dark city and neon lights. You can totally do stuff like that, but that's not really how it is in real life, right? Like if you've ever visited a Google office or an Amazon office, they're really nice. They make them look nice. The people who work there are very friendly, right? Mostly. It's I didn't want to make it like, hey, this is confirming kind of what you already know. And to do that, I kind of have to do the work of like approaching it in this sort of maybe even naive seeming way of just actually exploring all those things. To people who say that I never take a side, though, I would point to the endings of the game and say I think the endings, if you play multiple endings, I think you'll kind of see where my actual personal feelings about this stuff kind of come out a little bit more. But you have to go through the rest of the game to get there.
Yeah, I wonder if another kind of conversation that Ben and I were having about the game was the role of interactivity in the narrative, and why that was important to it. And you're kind of touching upon, I love that what you're getting at. Like I moved to Seattle a little less than 3 years ago for a creative writing MFA program at UW, so it was kind of ironic to see Haruman be there, but and now I work in tech and write creatively on the side, and it's one of these things where, like you're getting at, I think a lot of people have to find ways to rationalize, in some ways, a bit of the compromises they're making in order to make a living. And one of the things I'm wondering, thinking about Evelyn as the protagonist, is if the ability to choose her responses at different points and kind of humor these different perspectives, if that kind of helped you weave this narrative, as opposed to maybe if she was locked into this a certain perspective from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely part of it. Evelyn, in some ways, is so ambivalent because I myself don't want to let myself off the hook for being so great. As you mentioned in the intro, when I started in the games industry, I worked on big AAA games. When I was at Bungie, I worked on Halo, and I've also worked on Call of Duty at the very beginning of my career. And wanted to work on those games because they were very big games, and I wanted experience on like kind of the highest budget games of their day, and like the biggest games around. Like I wanted to see how they were made and stuff like that. At the same time, working on Call of Duty is, it's not like this completely like I don't necessarily feel amazing about going to work every day working on a game like that. I didn't, and at the same time, I did do the job, right, and I took the money. So stuff like that. It happened at the University of Washington too. Like some of the research grants that allowed me to have a salary to work on those research programs were from government sources, and not necessarily just the National Science Foundation, but also kind of future military research about like how do we use games to like teach. Well, it was they do a very good job of making it not seem military. They're just like, how do we use games to teach people in uncertain situations? They'll just say they have these like code words that they use. But the point is that like, in my own career, I've been in these situations where I worked on these kinds of things, and that's why I couldn't just let Evelyn off the hook as well, right? She's worked for the big tech company. She's made this thing that may or may not be beneficial for this guy who may or may not have great motives for the future, things like that. And it's something that I wanted to approach without kind of claiming any kind of moral superiority on my part, since that there's no way that I could, and I'm also not really interested in doing that.
Do you feel comfortable maybe talking about how the work culture shifted between, or was there a difference between working on these kind of big AAA games as opposed to working on something like Eliza?
Yeah, I mean, when I worked in AAA, it was that was like the first 10 years or so of my career, and that was a time when the crunch stuff was not only bad, but like not even necessarily super well known as it is today. Today, if you talk to people who are interested in making games, like in school or whatever, they've all heard the horror stories, and that's one of their number one concerns. And there's like a lot of talk now about how to alleviate that kind of crunch culture. Whether that's sincere or not is kind of another question. But in the like the 2000s or so, when I was in AAA, like that was just a matter of course, and it was like not even something you could really push back about, in the same way that you can today. And so a lot of the stuff in the game about like burnout and those kinds of things also comes from my experience on AAA and the crunch time and just feeling I don't know, just feeling like buried by work and the project, and like this sort of inevitability of doom, I guess, that kind of happens on projects like that. Working on Eliza was actually really great. One, because Zachtronics is a very small studio, and Zach Barth, the guy who runs it, is not interested in pushing people past their natural limit, like crunch time. He himself doesn't want to crunch, and he would never make other people do that. So it was much more healthy. I also I was able to write the script for Eliza and then get it made. So there wasn't a lot of this back and forth stuff that sometimes happens on games that extends the schedule out. Eliza is so straightforward in the way that it's designed. It's a very linear game, so there isn't a lot of like unforeseen consequences that sometimes happen in games, where it's like you add a feature and then that changes all this other stuff, and you have to extend the schedule for that reason. So it was a very smooth project from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think I want to get into some of that kind of transition more, but I guess I had one last question I wanted to ask about Eliza before we kind of broaden the scope a bit. Was I started playing the game after I got off off the link,
Oh,
and it was like almost like hilarious and kind of surreal to start. And then one of the opening sequences, you're on the link, and
yeah,
I assume that you literally recorded the sound or somehow got the sound of the
yeah.
link, because I was like, this is deja vu. And it just had me thinking, there's so many parts in the game, like you mentioned Magus Books, where
Hmm.
I used to go to all the time prior to the pandemic. And the game feels so intrinsically tied to Seattle, not just because of there's a tech boom here, and like Amazon and Google and Microsoft and things are here, but there's just something else about it that really stuck out to me, just the attention to detail. And I'm curious, like, why was it important for you to set it here? And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think one was definitely because it's in some ways it's kind of a personal story, right? And it's a story that I think makes sense to set in Seattle, and because of all the sort of the things going on here, like you mentioned, and then also that many of the thoughts that I've been having about this stuff took place, while I was here in Seattle, and so I think it's very true to the area to be talking about this kind of stuff. I also wanted to make a game in Seattle that was set in Seattle that was very accurate to the area and true to the area. A lot of games are, especially bigger AAA games, are very I want I'm trying to think of the right word for this, but they're just like not rooted in any particular place a lot of times. A developer uh, in one country will make a game set in another country. And there's this idea you can kind of just set your game anywhere, no matter where your studio is. You do a little research and you look up like how things look, right? And then you just build it and you just say, hey, this is such and such a place. And so a big games company like Ubisoft is making games that are supposed to take place in the American Midwest or something like that, and it's developed in France and Bulgaria and they have all the in China, right? They have these different outsourcing and studios everywhere around the globe, and they just say, oh well, we're gonna pick a setting for it, and we'll just do it. And so there's this kind of very I guess neoliberal supply chain kind of situation going on where like you can as long as there's someone who can do 3D modeling, they can do it anywhere. And so that was kind of like maybe a response to that, which is just like, this is a game set in Seattle, and it's made in Seattle, and it's like has a lot of stuff that you would only really understand if you've been here and kind of lived here for a while. Like you'll get it if you saw it. um, that was kind of the thinking behind that.
It paid off. It was like such a
Thanks.
surprising, really, it was really surprising to play it living here, especially because I know, last year they had The Last of Us 2, which took place a little bit
That's
in
right.
Seattle.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways kind of gets at what you're getting at of like, it certainly is representative of what it looks like. But outside of those aspects, it's not like it really matters too much narratively.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and to answer your question, I did literally bring like a little sound recorder on the light rail, and I recorded the announcement and the noise of the train.
Next stop, Capitol Hill Station.
That maybe dovetails like really nicely with. We had this question about like why a visual novel, and like what is added to this story by making it kind of interactive. I think you kind of heard Phil ask that before, but what is added to a story like this that it needs to be a interactive novel as opposed to a novel or a comic book. What do we get
Right.
by having the kind of sounds and the interaction?
That's a very good question, especially because Eliza is quite linear. It as a like just an overall design, it takes you through its story, and it doesn't necessarily allow you to just go your own way in a lot of ways. I would say I think that there are a few different things that the visual novel gets you that you don't get with like a literary novel. one, like you said, the sound, right, and the sound is tremendously important. The ambient sound, the water splashing, and the wind kind of at the just in that very opening menu. Sitting, we see Evelyn sitting in West Seattle looking at downtown, and the wind is blowing over the water, and you can just kind of feel that wind blowing at her, and it's very, very dark and blue, that kind of the way Seattle gets, where it's just everything is just steel gray. And that, I think, like that kind of feeling is so great when you can get it with the visual aspect and the sound aspect there. The visual novel also lets you have these character portraits. It lets you have these actor performances.
I had a dream this morning, but I can't remember what it was. It all vanished when the alarm went off. First time that's happened in a while. I've been drifting away inside my own world for too long. It's time for me to wake up.
And I think as a kind of like a multimedia project, that those are super important. But then, of course, like if you want those, why not make a film, right? And so the other side of that is the visual novel makes you click through to experience it. You can look at Evelyn's phone, use a couple different apps, look at emails. You can look around rooms a little bit, and again, it's all linear. You're not really like choosing where the story will go necessarily until the very end. But that kind of interactivity, I would argue, is still important, even though it's not big choices or choices with consequences. Some people say, like, in order to make good interactive narrative, everything should have a big consequence. I don't think that's true. I think that, like, sometimes even just like clicking to go to the next room, even though that's the only thing you can do, that's different than watching a movie where someone goes to the next room, right? There's just something qualitatively different about that. So even if the stakes are not high, even if it's not a big choice or anything, the idea that you advance the story and you are kind of like clicking around to do it, gives it a different feeling and gives it a different quality.
Yeah, that like a perfect example of that when I think about it is, after each session in Eliza, you have that moment where you're still in the room after you've gotten your rating and tip, and you can click on the seat, and you kind of, or the seat or the lamp or the painting, and you can get this interior moment of Evelyn thinking about things right after this intense moment, and yeah, just the act of clicking on those things and getting these different interior moments almost kind of puts you into her psyche as a character. So I can definitely see why that would be alluring.
Yeah, totally. There's something about playing a game where there's a little bit more of like a you are the character, even when you kind of see her in third person, but the therapy sequences in particular, right? They're like first person from her perspective, and she's looking right at the other character. And I think because you have to click and you have to like see them react, you really get a sense of, just like you said, of being that character in a way that I think if you filmed a movie, even if it was square on them in the film, you would still be like, well, I'm just watching this movie, right? You wouldn't really feel like you're the character in the same way.
I think maybe this is a good place for the sound question, and I'm wondering if you can maybe talk about or like describe a scene or a moment that maybe helps us understand your own relationship to technology and like how technology is like part of your own life. I don't know, like when you wake up in the morning, are you kind of checking your phone or logging on to your computer, or like what are the things you do that kind of might show people the way that tech is kind of integrated into your life?
I'll tie that in with Seattle too, because Seattle's a city associated with natural beauty, right, and the sound and forests and things like that. And I love to walk around the water, be near the water, listen to boats and things like that, and walk around the city. When it was possible, I used to walk around the city a lot. But the sound of technology and of course the sound of game development is really being in a room with a lot of whirring fans and computers, right? If you are a AAA game developer, you might have a giant gaming PC and a couple dev kits and other things that all take a lot of cooling fans. And so the server room in Eliza is one example of something where it just feels like there's just this rumbling, this whirring, constant noise. And so part of what I was doing in Eliza, I think, is contrasting those two kinds of soundscapes. One the humming of computers, which I'm never far from, and then kind of these like nature sounds and the sounds of like being in the natural world.
Maybe a weird question, but do you feel more comfortable one place or the other, or just different kinds of comfort in both those places?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I feel comfortable around computers, other than that I'm just so used to it. So much as how I don't really associate it with anything particularly good or bad. It's just like it's just a constant. I think it's just been something that has been around for, I guess, my whole life. So, yeah. I don't know that I associate any particular, emotion to the computers themselves. Although, to talk about the light rail again, somehow transportation noises always really get me. Trains, the ferry, if you've ever ridden the ferry, anything that's like a kind of, or even the bus, like just any kind of like mass transportation thing, always brings back memories of like being in that city, and that's part of why I really wanted the train at the super accurate light rail, Seattle light rail in the game.
Yeah, it's there's something about the light rail, especially where I have to take it a lot, and I even remember like the first time I took it, because Ben and I are both from Michigan, where public transit isn't very good, and once you get past just like how efficient the link is, there is something kind of pleasant about how it sounds and like what the announcer woman, kind of like a female voice, kind of sounds like, that I totally get.
Yeah, trains pulling into stations and stuff like that is just a huge like nostalgia sort of thing. And if you're from a place with a lot of trains, like Japan, for example, right? Like it's such a part of the culture there because of just you remember those sounds from when you're a kid, and you associate them with you end up associating them with your events in your life, things like that.
Yeah, where did you grow up? Was Seattle a place you came to later in life, or?
So I moved to Seattle, let's see, in about 13 years ago. Okay. I'm actually originally from Southern California, LA, and my mom is Japanese, so I did spend some time in Japan when I was growing up, but not really like a long time. Like I didn't really live there for any length of time.
Yeah, I was curious, kind of sticking into that realm of like childhood, and in relation to games. I'm interested in like how you got, because a lot of your personal projects are interactive fiction. I'm interested, like, what kind of was your first exposure to the medium? When I think of myself, it's like Newgrounds and like old little visual flash games. So I'm wondering what it was for you.
When I was a kid, people's, like my friends, it was early enough. People still had like Nintendos and stuff, and like Apple IIs, but and people my age will say like, oh, it was the Apple II that really got me into games. But I actually wasn't super into those. I think maybe just because they didn't seem that interesting to me at the time. Like I was maybe too young, but I also like they just didn't look that interesting. And it actually was really the Macintosh later with stuff like Mist. Mist I think was a really really big one because it like actually looked like a place, unlike a lot of other kind of like game stuff like Mario or whatever just didn't catch my eye so much, right? But like Mist like really looks like a place. It's detailed, um, and there's sound and music, and it's kind of got this very ambient sense around it. And somehow that's the kind of stuff that really really caught my eye and why I wanted to get into games and interactive technology. And I think maybe that shows in my work too. Like I'm less interested in like modeling combat or like any of that kind of stuff, even though I play those types of games myself for fun. Like make in terms of making a game, like I'm much more interested in that kind of like sense of place and a feeling and kind of getting at the kind of stuff that the kinds of effects that like literary fiction can have. Those are the kinds of effects I want to produce.
Yeah, that dovetails really nicely. So Phil and I both played Eliza, but we also both played your Apology Simulator.
Uh-huh.
And I think maybe that's another game where it's like, I think it's trying to understand our relationship to text, but also kind of our relationship to kind of perspective, kind of where we're standing in relationship to the idea or the apology or the app. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about maybe what draws you back to kind of these themes.
I think one of the themes that's common, I think, with Eliza and Apology Simulator is seeing things from multiple perspectives, right? In Apology Simulator, you put together an apology as the person apologizing, and then it kind of like invites you to think of as the apology as the person who received the apology by changing the way that it's drawn and so forth. And I don't know, that's always been interesting to me how different people can see a similar thing and come to wildly different conclusions, right? That's something that I've been interested to think about. And then the way people make the decisions that they do, right? Like when they're apologizing and how they kind of like try to be correct in their apology, even though there's it's kind of obvious that they're not. Things like that. I've always been interested in that as well, and like the language that people use when they're kind of trying to obscure something or elide something, things like that. I guess that all comes back to, I think, my interest in literature. Really, like that's kind of where I draw a lot of I think artistic goals from. I want to represent something that's very human, something that's a little bit uncertain, something that feels real, and something that doesn't overpower your senses so much as it kind of like draws you in. A lot of games are very very good at completely overpowering your senses, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but like a book doesn't necessarily do that. It kind of pulls you inside of it, and that's something that I want to try to do with games.
Yeah, there's the other moment that kind of stood out in that game is Apology Simulator is the moment when you're choosing to accept or reject the apologies. I think there's like chirping birds in the background, so it like puts you in this like kind of peaceful, contemplative place while you're reading what I think, for at least the first couple, were like pretty, I think, transparently bad apologies.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you reject, and I think there's like a pretty like hard sound when you do it. So it was another moment too where I think you're working sound into what's happening as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love the ability to like add sound to stuff. That's always been a part of what I do as well, right? The sound and music also being a big aspect of like my creative work. So that's always fun to be able to to accentuate what you can do with multiple, things like that.
Yeah, I think, whether it be Apology Simulator or Eliza, or some of your other like interactive fiction projects, something I really appreciate about your projects are the emphasis on like interiority, on the interior life, and I think that speaks a lot to like that love of literature and whatnot. Like before hopping on the call, Ben and I were talking about there's a scene late in Eliza with Holiday, I think her name was, who's like an older woman, doesn't really tech savvy, and you gain access to her privacy data, and you can look through her phone, and it was a moment for me where I felt like mechanically it was like euphoric. It was like this moment of, it reminded me of like collage and literature and kind of like found artifacts, and you get to sift through them and make your own conclusions. And this is all to say, I'm just curious, what kinds of literature and maybe other media are you kind of interested in, or like that you love? What do you keep on coming back to?
I guess my main thing is the novel. The form of the novel has been something that I've always connected with quite a lot over my life, and I've for many years I've tried to write novels as well. It's something that is always been in sort of the background of everything else that I've been doing, is being interested in this form. It's I don't know. I don't have a degree in it, and I don't. So the amount of training that I have in it is entirely just from working on writing in my day job, and then a workshop or two that I've done. But it's I think in terms of just like engaging with human experience and like representing that in some way, I think it's really it's something that really speaks to me. And so if there's anything that I can do to like sort of bring the kind of complexity and sense that you get from a really good novel, by using the techniques of games and interactive technology, then that's what I'm going to try to do.
So I think we're starting to run out of questions for you. I'm wondering if there's something we haven't asked you about the game that you want to touch on, or maybe you want to talk about some upcoming projects or something that you're working on that people should kind of keep an eye out for.
Oh, let's see. So there are some games that I've been working on, which I think haven't been announced yet, unfortunately. But but they are going to come out soon. Some of them are just more like, more commercially minded games, so they're not necessarily the more artsy ones like Eliza or Apology Simulator. But I'm also working on more games in that vein as well. Things that are a little bit less commercially viable, but more kind of, I think, on the side of like trying to explore this kind of stuff. I guess I can talk about that a little bit too, which is that like games like Apology Simulator are entirely like, they're entirely text based, right? It's just available for free on the internet. It's not the type of thing that you can really do as like your living in games right now. If you talk to publishers and things like that, they want to see these very, very playable games where people will spend hundreds of hours on them, or they're procedural in some way, so you can theoretically play them infinitely, and there's lots of progression, all kinds of things like that. And so from a business point of view, like making narrative games, especially making like very complex narrative games that might be a little bit, they're not 100% just like satisfying right off the bat, or they don't hew to like a kind of like an established genre, like a mystery or something like that. It's a hard sell for publishers, and it's entirely understandable because they just don't do like the numbers that other games do. So it can be tough to want to make games like that, but then have the interest not necessarily be as strong as they are for other types of games. And so that's something that's just, I don't know, I think I have had to kind of make peace with in some way by continuing to work on the more commercial games at the same time that I try to do some of this stuff. I think a lot of people have to make that kind of trade-off.
Yeah, I think it's a very familiar calculation.
Right. For sure.
Gotta
right?
do one thing for the art and one thing for keeping the lights on.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. That's true of any, whether that's writing or music or whatever you do. Right.
Well, I guess just thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon, evening to talk to us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I feel like I could talk for at least another hour if we had the time.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, like I'm just so grateful to just like I got like very aggressively passionate about both the history of the Eliza chatbot and Weizenbaum. I was reading got me reading interviews with Weizenbaum and so it was just like it was such I think a contemplative game and got me really thinking about these things, and so,
that's awesome.
For that alone, thank you.
That's great to hear. I couldn't ask for anything more than that. That's great. Yeah, Weizenbaum is a fascinating thinker and character, and like I said, he was like one of the only people, especially in his group at MIT, saying, "Hey, we should think about this. Maybe this is wrong." And and everyone else, Marvin Minsky being like kind of the poster child for the opposite, was like, we're gonna AI will be a solved problem by like 1978 or whatever. Like he was like saying all this crazy stuff, and it's because the government kept giving him money. This was during the Cold War, and it was just like, a lot of the technologies that we have. I'm just rambling now. A lot of the technologies that we have were like originally developed in the kind of in this Cold War atmosphere. So like speech recognition, for like the very first stabs at speech recognition were like the military saying, "Oh, we need soldiers to be able to talk to airplanes," and then here MIT professors figure this out, and so a lot of the stuff we have now kind of like derives from that world. And so and if you find out how much, it's like, wow, this was really all this is kind of all from the military. So like it's very interesting for Weizenbaum to point that out.
Yeah, I'm very much a convert of the Church of Weizenbaum. He was saying some stuff that I was just like, wow. Like, first of all, wild that he was saying this as early as he was, but it was just very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the interview could have been written like today.
Yeah.
Like literally the one we were looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he has that one quote about, I think he says that like he believes computers are like an inherently conservative force, which I was just like, damn.
Right? It's really bracing to think about today and to be like, wow, that he said that in like the 70s or whatever, and it's just like, yep, that's true. And I think like people at the time weren't really ready to hear that, right? Like for a long time people were like, oh, computers will democratize things and the internet is going to set us free, right? Like well, maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we won't keep you, but thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
We want to thank Matthew Seiji Burns for coming through on the show and giving us such an interesting conversation regarding interactive fiction, visual novels, and technology. You can find him on Twitter at Matthew Seiji or at his website, MatthewSeijiBurns.com.
Yeah, I listening back to the end of the interview, I was kind of gassing him up a ton and just being like, "Wow, I'm so grateful for your game," and like, wow, I really enjoy playing it. But like, I genuinely like think that was a good conversation and like a great game that like actually did make me think about these things in a deeper way. And yeah, I'm so grateful that he came on and was willing to talk to us.
Yeah, and I'm happy to see like this kind of medium expand in the ways that it is. I think there's been such a renaissance in some ways in terms of public perception of visual novels and what interactive fiction can be. And I think as somebody who's interested in maybe someday doing some kind of interactive story, Matthew had a lot of valuable things to say in regards to showcasing different perspectives when it comes to a narrative and still having a point of view within it.
So, Phil, we're just transitioning to only covering interactive games from now on?
That's the podcast, baby.
All right, let's go.
Thanks to Matthew Seiji Burns for stopping by on the show and giving us such a great conversation. You can find his work at MatthewSeijiBurns.com and on Twitter at MatthewSeiji. Where can they find you, Ben?
You can find me at sad_radio_lad.
And you can find me at 3D Cisco on Twitter. And you can find this show at originstory_ or our website, originstory.show. Thanks to Melody Hirsch for the awesome cover art, and thanks to Ryan Hopper for providing the awesome intro and outro music that you hear on the show.
If you have any kind of questions, concerns, ideas, I think, Phil, we're starting to get to the point where we're thinking about like, what is the audience interested in hearing from, or kind of who would you be interested in us interviewing? Kind of reach out to us, let us know. Maybe also tell us about your favorite sandwich.
Exactly. Yeah, we really want to hear what you all have to say, and if you have any suggestions, concerns, ideas, or if you want us to, maybe answer some questions in the pre-show, then hit us up at theoriginstorypod@gmail.com.
Salami, no salami, tomato, no tomato. Where you at?
Ben, you're a vegetarian.
That's not true. It is. It's basically true. Sad to say.
Secrets out. Catch y'all next time.
Bye.